Welcome to the supplementary lecture entitled The Placebo Effect. Can believing make you well? First of all, what is the placebo effect? It is known that human subjects in healthcare often improve or report improvement even when they are receiving an ineffective treatment. In healthcare studies, the control group, therefore, doesn't usually get no treatment at all. Rather, they get a sham treatment. That is, a treatment that is not expected to either cause an improvement or a worsening in the patient's condition. The idea is that the treatment and control groups should have identical or nearly identical experiences. That way, the placebo effect should impact both groups in the same way. In the 1960s, there was a popular method of treating stomach ulcers called gastric freezing. Cold liquid was pumped into the patient's stomach, chilling the sites with the ulcers. The Journal of the American Medical Association reported on one such study. The stomachs of 80 patients with duodenal ulcer have been frozen with immediate relief of symptoms, early disappearance of ulcer craters, and depressed gastric secretory responses. That was in 1962. There was a problem, however, with these studies. Namely, they didn't control for the placebo effect. Eventually, someone noticed that this was a problem. And in later studies, some patients were assigned to a control group and others were assigned to the treatment group. In the control group, the patients received a placebo. Tubes were still run into their stomachs through their mouths. They heard the noise of machines running in the background. The tubes in their mouth became cold, but the difference was this: no liquid was actually released into their stomachs. And the result? The treatment still worked. Both patients whose ulcers were frozen and those who merely thought that their ulcers were frozen improved. Well, we conclude that the placebo effect is what is causing the improvement. People get better because they think they will get better, and for no other reason. Now, when we're working with the placebo effect, one of the things we need to do is blinding. The problem is that the placebo effect is hard to control directly. Patients may pick up on subtle clues about whether the staff believes they're going to get better or not. If they pick up on the fact that they're in the control rather than the treatment group, then the placebo effect will not impact them, but it will impact the patients who are in the treatment group. So even though you see a difference between the two groups, the difference could be the placebo effect. So how do we control for the placebo effect? The answer is with what is known as blinding. In single-blind studies, patients don't know if they're getting the placebo or the real treatment. But in double-blind studies, neither the patients nor the staff knows whether they are receiving the placebo or the actual treatment. This double blinding prevents subtle differences in the patient's experience. The principle is this: patient experience can have a strong influence over outcomes. Placebos, that is the sham treatment, makes the subjective experience for the control and the treatment groups as similar as possible. Ideally, we want these experiences to be identical. So, in summary, the experimental design that controls for the placebo effect is this. First of all, for any quality experiment, you must implement treatment, control, randomization, and replication. The reason is that only controlled experiments can make cause and effect conclusion. Observational studies by themselves cannot do that. But the placebo effect matters as well. So in So in these, the gold standard of such testing is the double-blind experiment, in which neither the staff administering the experiment nor the patients who are receiving the treatments know whether they're getting a placebo or the real treatment. This is the best way to control for the placebo effect. The control and treatment group experiences should be as close to the same as possible. Now, there are some special problems that come up as we begin looking at controlling the placebo effect. One of the difficulties can be that it's hard to actually make the double blinding work. Studies of psychiatric drugs are well known for facing this challenge. The problem is this: almost all psychiatric drugs have strong negative side effects. So patients in the study can fairly quickly guess whether they're receiving a placebo or whether they're receiving the real drug based on the presence of some kind of a negative side effect. Patients who realize they're not experiencing a side effect will conclude that they're receiving a placebo. Researchers then must expend considerable effort to try to counter these guesses, but practically speaking, smart patients may figure things out anyway. The placebo effect, however, also raises other rather deep questions, and that is that the placebo effect is very well documented, but it is mostly ignored except for attempts to control it. But what about what's going on here? Why are we seeing a placebo effect? You see, the problem is that the placebo effect is not limited to subjective experience. For instance, there are many cases on record of cancer patients who go into long-term remission while they're on placebo, but then quickly die after the sham treatment ends. It seems hard to deny that the experience of receiving a placebo treatment actually was helping those patients. Why did that happen? Why is it that either the human intention or the human expectation of healing actually causes either symptom relief or objective healing? Is it possible to maximize this effect? If we could, it would certainly be valuable clinically. Can we explain how it works? Well, some things are known for sure, but others seem hard to figure out at this stage. Placebo effects, in and of themselves, are just beginning to be studied in their own right. So these are interesting questions, but placebo effects, double blinding, these are the ways we handle. This is the way we control for the placebo effect, which must always be considered when we're doing experiments with human subjects.